I'm Joe Dunton. I'm here in the Frankfurt Museum to guide you through the lenses that Stanley Kubrick accumulated over the years of his filmmaking. The range of lenses is a vast range of lenses. His understanding of lenses came from his stills background, and lenses actually make the pictures. The lenses are the most important part of cinema picture making, which he understood very well. This is a Snyder lens. You can see how small they are. They're designed for cinema. They're designed for cinema usage. This is a Zeiss version. Again, Stanley would have every sort of lens made for his 2C Ariflex. This is a really tiny 135mm lens made for the 2C camera. These are very early lenses, probably around the end of the 50s, beginning of the 60s. These were, but he would actually maybe take 10 of these lenses and choose the best one for himself. So he would actually ask the manufacturer to send him 10 lenses and then choose the best one. Now we're on to a zoom lens. This is a 5:1 Cooke zoom lens, very famous lens. It's only a 5:1 range, which is 20mm to 100mm. The t-stop is 3.1. This is a very famous workhorse of cinema lenses. The quality is equally as good to prime lenses. It was used in part of the ballroom sequence of Barry Lyndon and also on The Shining. We used it in a couple of sequences in the ballroom of Eyes Wide Shut. This is the 20:1 zoom used on Barry Lyndon that you can actually watch on the clip next to us. This ranges from 25mm to 500mm, and on a very long zoom it's very powerful. It will actually go into an eyeball. If you want to zoom into an eyeball and zoom out of an eye, right to see the whole face. So this is a very, very unusual lens. Stanley was so fascinated by the lens, he eventually copied it and made his own version, and this is his own version of that lens. This is Stanley's favourite camera. It's a 2C Ariflex. He could hand hold it, and you see lots of still, well, not very many stills because he didn't have lots of stills taken of him, but this would be his favourite camera. In this mode it has 3 lens turret so that you can change the lens. His favourite lens on this camera was an 18mm Cooke Speed Panchro. So and often you would see the still of him with it as this. This is, as I say, his favourite machine. This is another interesting lens. Stanley used this very powerfully on Clockwork Orange. In the bedroom sequences, he had an actual special camera housing made for this lens. It's a 9.8mm Kinoptic, made in France, and I think it's T2, and it has its own rear filters that slot into the back of its lens. This also was used in some of the space cameras that went on space France supply for the NASA projects. This is an Ingenue 10:1 zoom lens. This is incredibly famous. It was the most popular zoom lens from the 1966 period till the early mid-75 period. It's a 10:1 Ingenue, 25mm to 250mm, and basically it was the only zoom lens for cinema until the Cooke arrived on the scene. This Stanley would have had to choose this lens from about 10 other lenses because they were never consistent. Each one was different, and if you ever have to use one, you have to choose very carefully the lens you use. Stanley was a great collector of lenses. Most stills photographers will collect their own lenses. They fall in love with their own lens. They know exactly what the lens will do. So Stanley, different from other people, will always buy his own lenses. He would then choose from 10 lenses of a particular focal length and then choose the best one that he would buy. Other people today will rent a box of lenses. They don't actually take the care in choosing each of their particular lens. This was particularly good with Stanley, and I learnt an awful lot from this from Stanley, that each lens is slightly different. In the early days, lenses were hand ground. Nowadays they're more computer ground, so they're more consistently good. In the early days they were hand ground, so there would be a difference between each lens in quality. This particular lens is a Novaflex, again from a stills camera. Stanley always were researching stills lenses. You can see the focus he's had modified to make it easier for cinema focus. He's had special bearings put in here so that it runs very smoothly. This gives you the long lens effect of when you're photographing the soldiers in Barry Lyndon or Clockwork Orange, for the long lens effect. And this again he's had converted to fit on his Arriflex camera. The lenses now are getting smaller. This is the first wide angle lens for the 2C. It's a 14.5mm. This is a you can see it's very tiny, but it again fitted his Arriflex camera, and it was very, very popular. It was designed black and white for black and white photography. Now we have two Cooke Speed Panchros here, and they fit on the Barry Lyndon camera. So these would take other shots on the Barry Lyndon film that were not on the .750s. This is a 100mm deep field. It has a deeper depth of field, so the actual depth of field is greater on this lens, and that's why it was called a deep field. And this is a regular 50mm lens. This is normally what was used up until the 60s, 1960s. You would just use a set of these lenses on a studio camera. They're incredibly good quality. The thing I like about them, that they were designed by people, lens craftsmen, that would use a slide rule to actually manufacture the calculations and look at the pictures when they made the calculations. Today so many lenses are made by computers, and computers actually don't look at the pictures. But these are very fantastic lenses. This is probably Stanley's favourite lens. There's an 18mm version of this lens and a 25mm version of this lens. This is again a Cooke Speed Panchro, and you can tell by the tiny little back elements. It's designed for a cinema frame, it's not designed for a film frame. This is the 100mm, which I showed you previously in the Mitchell mount. This is now in an Arriflex mount. This is a 100mm deep field Cooke Speed Panchro. And their idea of deep field is when you historically use a longer lens, you don't have very much depth of field. So if you photograph an eye, the rest of the face goes out of focus very quickly. With the deep field, it holds the eye back into the face better, and it looks actually incredibly nice. This is again his ingenuity. He found that Canon just brought out a 35mm 1.4 for their stills cameras, for their stills camera. This is then put into a BNC, a Mitchell mount, so he could use this with his .7 lenses for Barry Lyndon. This would have been used on Barry Lyndon. A 1.4 35mm. This is most probably the most famous lens of all time, because it was developed for NASA for the moon landings for Hasselblad. It was a .7 lens, which is 2 stops faster than 1.4. Stanley found it with his research, as he does. He then converted this lens to go onto a film camera. It's a 50mm prime lens from here to here, and it was when film stocks were not incredibly as fast as they are today, and this enabled Stanley to do his candlelit sequences in Barry Lyndon. And we had 4 of these lenses. This one has an additional optical unit added on the front to make it a 35mm angle lens instead of a 50mm angle lens. And the actual image plane is very close to the back element. We had to build a special camera, which you'll see in the museum. The lenses are now getting bigger and bigger. This is the same 50mm lens from the Hasselblad for Barry Lyndon. Here he had Zeiss make a wide angle attachment for it. So this particular wide angle attachment is made by Zeiss, especially for him for this 50mm lens, and this again made it into a 35mm angle lens, and you can see it's quite a large front element, and you'll see it in the case down beside us. These are the beginning of Zeiss's entry into cinema lenses in a high-speed fashion. After Barry Lyndon's success with the 0.7s, Zeiss started to make a 1.4 lens. These were the set of lenses used on Full Metal Jacket. Again, he would use the very fast lenses, and he was a very much available light photographer. It would be try to be a natural light and available light photographer. This has got the new bayonet mount at the time, but it is a 1.4 lens, and they made a complete set from 25, 35, 50 and 85 was their first range of lenses in this mode. This is typical of Stanley. Stanley would take a stills lens. This is a 180mm Nikon Nikkor 2.8. He had it modified by his favourite lens technician, a guy called George Hill, that worked at Optex. George would have modified this lens. He also used to send his lenses back to George to be cleaned. He would not let anybody else clean the front of the lens except his lens technician. This is a 180 Nikkor. This particular lens is a 90mm kill fit. It's a macro lens. In later days it was called a pack shot lens, where you would photograph a packet of cigarettes or something close. It's unique in its way. It has a rear filter holder at the back, and it does magic by actually racking out on double threads to become a macro lens, and it will photograph 1:1 from one image size there to one image size there. 90mm macro kilo.